Hello, friends. How are you doing today? Well, welcome to Great People interview series. And today we have a very successful entrepreneur. But before I welcome him, let me tell you today we all talking about social media and we want to be successful in social media, right? Well, yes, it's so much about social media that we know and we talk about. But if you get some secrets, some tips to succeed, I think that's something that we're going to reveal today with the experience from the co founder of Spin, Max. Welcome, Max.
Hello, great to be here.
Fantastic. So, Max is a co founder, chief business officer at Spin. It's a creative first social media agency. He spent almost a decade in building business, selling business. He has been into a variety of different businesses as well, but um, digital presence is his core skill. And of course, when you apply your digital skills into social media, that becomes even more niche area that he is specialized into. And that's his agency, which is specialized. So, and he's worked with clients such as Google, Asus, and so on. So let me go back to Max and ask him um, if you could just briefly tell us about your journey. How did you get into, this social media? Was it a fascination that everybody has got today, or, you have some organic or some story behind it?
Yeah, of course. No, thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I suppose from my perspective, I started before it was glamorized. I always say that it was quite a naive leap of faith into business. There was no plan, there was no strategy. It was a big organic demand that just sort of snowballed from one thing to another. But yeah, the long story short is that I didn't end up going to university. I started a cycling business when I was 19. I was really into cycling. I had a retail cycling store, so a physical business. And then as a young person in business, as you can imagine, like online and social media and digital were inherently important to me. Maybe I found that it was easier for me than it was someone that was a little bit more mature in business. I was an avid social user and really got excited by this low barrier to entry that you have, where you can build a following and a community and potential customer base purely through sharing content and storytelling in a free way. So for me, yeah, no disposable income for advertising. This was my resourceful way of getting into it. And I ended up building that business. It was a local business for local people for a long time. And then I started really using organic social media and paid social advertising to build that business to sell nationally and then internationally. And I was fascinated by the sort of power that social media has. And as a young person, you often sort of feel this imposter syndrome, like you need to go through decades of experience to gain something. And what I loved about social media is it was such a new thing and it was evolving so quickly that actually you can be an expert in it if you just dedicate a lot of energy into it in a small window. So yeah, it was really interesting and obviously a great opportunity for businesses to punch above their weight. So yeah, I did that and then ended up selling that cycling business and launching a social media agency. Lots of brands would get in touch and say, how do you do it? Can you do it for me? And bit by bit, I sort of said yes and started with some very small consulting. And then that sort of snowballed over a period of time. And yeah, we're now nearly about 100 people across APAC, LATAM, and Europe, working on social media channels for big brands. We started with lots of small brands and slowly sort of worked our way up over the time. And yeah, now work with global enterprise businesses and help them sort of stay dialed in culturally on social to build audiences that are connected and engaged and follow them. So Yeah, that's a big. That's sort of my mini intro, but I won't ramble for too much.
Yeah, well, I think that's amazing. I think how you built from your knowledge you gathered from what you did in terms of your social media and digital presence for your cycling business, and when you realize, well, that's really something you're good at, and you start applying into the commercial world, and that gave birth to your agency, and which is kind of grown really well. So that means you and your team is definitely doing something really, really good. And that's working for people and businesses. So, well, it sounds kind of simple sometimes. So, social media as a networking tool, everybody would use it. Some might have slightly more knowledge than the others, and they think they are making use of it. Um, but it has evolved to one of the most powerful engines for business growth today. So it's not just something where you just spend time and see what happens. It's kind of more serious, and a go-to market strategy for many. So from your perspective, how entrepreneurs today build real, sustainable businesses in the world that is so deeply driven by social media?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's obviously matured and evolved a lot since I've been in it and started. We started, creating business accounts for brands on social media, and now I'd be surprised to come across a business or a brand that doesn't have a social media account. But I think with that comes its own challenges, right? There is more competition. It's a noisier space, a busier space, and there is this real sort of danger or temptation to sort of chase visibility and noise and cut through. And we've sort of are going through this sort of, I would say, a slight correction in the market now in terms of the content that we see on social media, which was, I guess, largely off the back of TikTok. And I call it like the TikTokification of content, of this very like fast pace, attention grabbing, hooky, sometimes slightly clickbaity content that has created attention, which is part of it. But I think the other pieces of the puzzle are equally as important. Is like, how authentic is that content and the attention that you've grabbed? Are you just grabbing attention and then sort of dropping it? Is it relevant to the audiences? Do they feel like entertained or informed by the content, or is it just sort of a clickbait content that sort of like leaves them high and dry? So I think there's this like balance that needs to happen really around how you create content that's relevant to like your audience, whilst also being intelligent with like social first formats and the right and correct ways of attention grabbing. Playing with hooks is still like an important piece of that. But it's sort of being strategic and thinking about like the full picture, and also as your consumer your audience that you're trying to engage with, like, you don't immediately earn the right to have their attention. You can't just sell to them immediately. You need to build that up over time. So it's sort of creating this like softly approach of cool content that you think is adding value to their lives, rather than just like asking for something directly. So being aware of the ego-led aspect. I think lots of businesses now really, because of the low barrier to entry with building online websites, AI, technology, social media, create businesses without a lot of like viability testing and thought. It's easy to launch a business overnight now, especially in certain countries. It's very cost effective, it's very low risk. But I think there's a real danger with that comes just lots of noise, lots of businesses that aren't necessarily viable businesses, that aren't necessarily demand led. They're often ego led, just by saying that you have your own business or you're an entrepreneur. And there's sort of a glamorizing that's happened over the last sort of 5 to 6 years, I would say, especially off the back of the pandemic. Um, so yeah, for me, it's always like really thinking about things in a considered way. Like, does the world need this business? Am I actually solving a problem? Am I supporting an audience that don't already have, um, an opportunity to sort of
I
get
think
this solution made?
yeah, sorry. So I think a lot of what you said, a few of those things people kind of read when do's and don'ts of social media and the content and all that, right? Um, which is fantastic. But could you elaborate in by giving some example so people can actually relate? Because when you said social media first, okay, so
Yeah,
it's a term that you fully understand, and that's why you get the customers, right?
yeah,
But don't it's English.
yeah,
I understand,
yeah.
but actually, what is
What
social
does it?
first?
Yeah,
What is that
yeah,
content that you think is relevant? Is this business required to exist in the world?
yeah. It's a good question. I start with social first, and then we'll talk about business. But I think social first for me is living and breathing in situ on social media. So often that's viewed through a mobile phone. Often that's vertical format. Often it's video format, and this is changing increasingly all the time. Um, and there are certain things that you will see, formats in terms of the way videos are cut, um, in trend-led sort of like formats, but also like relatively lo-fi content. I would say is quite social first for me. Like, there's ways in which brands can arrive at the right time and do things a certain way, but iPhone shot content is very social first. It's sort of it bears no what's the word, like, there's no risk of it seeming too like polished and premium. Sometimes it can be really just, it feels like human to human. It's not like a brand looking down at an audience and saying like we're sat on our high horse and we believe that the world should be a certain way because of X, Y, and Z. Like, it feels quite like eye to eye, from a social first perspective. And obviously that's changing all the time with the platforms shifting. We're seeing good success with human-led content. There was lots of like design assets, very polished articles. We really want to see like people's faces talking to cameras, um, in a sort of a vulnerable and self-deprecating way. And then in terms of like businesses, like deserve like the viability of businesses on social media now is, yeah, I guess to my point in that it's so easy to launch a business. There's nothing to stop me launching, a t-shirt business tomorrow using a print on demand company. It's very low risk. It's very easy for me to just make an Instagram account and say that's what I'm doing. And I think there's obviously, I don't want to like shut that down completely, because there's education in that for the individual that's doing it. It's not
Yeah.
completely pointless, but I think it's important to sort of think about like longer term strategy, audiences, like what are you selling and is it really important, and sort of is it unique, because there's just lots of businesses that look very similar at the moment. So yeah, that's my top take on that. And then viability is like, do the unit economics add up? Like, we're straying away from social media slightly, but as an entrepreneur, it's really important for me to sort of think about like, the cost, benefit, and the whole analysis of the business model. Like, does it actually make sense? How are you going to acquire customers, and what does that cost look like? And does it fit in your margin, for the product that you're selling and shipping? So probably a conversation for another day.
Yeah. So social media often blurs the line between visibility and actual business results. Um, in your opinion, your experience, which is pretty much around, how to drive results, how to drive growth, um, what does it take to turn online engagement into genuine revenue driving growth?
It's a very good question. Obviously, it's a big question, but I think social media sort of obviously gives this ability for everyone to punch above their weight, so they have that access to an unlimited amount of audience, like a huge size, huge demographic base. But I think the real art is connecting the awareness to action. So you generate that initial awareness, and how do you then build this relationship that ensures that the consumer engages and then obviously goes on to purchase. So at Spin, we always look at this in like 3 levels of social performance. Obviously, the first one is the attention. So, like, are you actually capturing the attention? That's where like good creative, social first creative comes in. And then it's the affection. Like, are people connecting emotionally with your brand? Like, is there something unique here that they haven't seen before? Is it something that they really relate to and engage with? And then obviously the action is the key part. Is like, are you giving them something clear and valuable to do next? I think sometimes we assume a lot, and we shouldn't assume anything really. It's really important to be clear on like what that journey, the ideal journey looks like, and whether, if you're selling something, what it is, but at the right time in the right place. I think we're in an interesting time at the moment where like consumers are very educated on brands and advertising, largely off the back of social media and its advertising relationship with the account. Is like, we give our data and our content and access to this platform for free. In exchange, you will be advertised to. And over time, those advertisements have got more and more relevant and dynamic. So really based on your interests and what you're already interested in buying in. And that's obviously a benefit. But yeah, the danger is that people stop at attention and don't think about the next stage. Obviously, having good engagement is great, but it doesn't necessarily translate to a commercial good business success. So you really need to create that bridge between content and conversion. That could be through storytelling a lot of the time. Obviously, using different features in social media, so like DMs, comments, Instagram stories, Reels, TikToks, just to sort of build a bit more of a dynamic relationship, which isn't solely focused about the content that's been published publicly, but maybe the things around it. And then obviously, like, paid media is really powerful on social media. You have this access to a huge audience. You can optimize incredibly dynamically based on different products and interests and individuals, and create clear customer journeys, which I think is really exciting. But ultimately, you need to be authentic in your approach. So, like, gone are the days where like everything on social had to be very glossy and perfect. I think actually brands building in public and sharing sort of their vulnerabilities or questions to their potential customers around which angle they prefer is also really appreciated, and I think it builds a slightly deeper relationship. Largely.
Yeah, well, listening to that, I have 2 questions, and you have just the perfect one answer to that. So, the area that we just talked about: attention, then affection, and then action. So, from awareness to conversion, right? And so, could you elaborate that with an example? You may not take any specific name if you don't want to, but anything that you must have done it for a customer, how it was, and then what changes you made to make it work for them. And also, when we're talking about social media storytelling, again, give us an example so we can understand. Okay, it was that kind of a customer, and this is how they said on the social media, which is not storytelling. And then what you got into once you got into it, how did you actually do the storytelling on social media?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll try and think of an example that is the full funnel, full 360, because often we help on supporting different areas of it and not all the way through. But an example is, I'm involved in a running brand, and a great way in which that running brand started and launched from an awareness perspective is seeding the product to creators and influencers, who would post about it. So it was purely like, this is a cool brand, I'm using it to go to the gym or for my daily run. It was a very subtle association of brand, which triggered an initial awareness, and obviously the brand page was tagged in it, so people could start slowly sort of like following and being curious about the product. And then we run paid advertising throughout the whole funnel. So there's slightly longer form storytelling pieces around the brand, like what does the brand stand for? Why would it relate to a certain individual? And they start to sort of follow and engage in the content, and we keep that content sort of going throughout. And then over time, you obviously talk about the product and maybe some USPs of the product and why it's a good product to buy, and where that product could be used, and maybe examples from a social proofing perspective of individuals already using and wearing that product, so people sort of create trust with the brand. And then people start to visit the website and start to click around on the website and products. They might not buy straight away, they're just curious, it's still early days, and then they're scrolling social media, and this is where like paid advertising, I think, is so beautiful, because it comes in at the right time, in the right place, in the right format. And we'll run ads to people that have visited certain products or pages on the website, with examples of that product in action, so they can see it very specifically. And then also, once they've visited certain product pages and maybe just looking at sizes, then it's a specific call to action to buy that product, and maybe a discount off the first order to get them over the line. So it's a blend of a few different things, but I think content creators using influencers, obviously creating different types of content, so slightly more storytelling led content, videos, educational, talking about the product in different ways, examples of the product in action, and then obviously the product at the end. Maybe some theories around the brand and why we believe certain things. Sharing our opinion, I think, is always quite nice. And then even maybe getting the audience to select what should be the next color range for this product, because it makes them feel really emotionally invested and like they're part of the brand, and that's what we want.
Brilliant. I think that last piece is really amazing. How you can get people involved in your brand, and then when you launch that kind of color, you tell them that, yeah, it was your suggestion, by the way, right? So obviously you need to buy. But I think that was just on a lighter note. But I think sometimes the questions are too simple. But I know behind the scenes the answers are quite complex. Your thinking, the agency's thinking is quite complex, and such a question, to just go into the detail of this example that you shared about running brand. Now, we always say in business, what is the problem that you're solving for the customer, the audience, right? But now, if you have different age groups, you are actually solving, or you have to solve different problems with the same product or the different variety of the product. But when you are on social media, your post is exposed to every bit of audience, right? So for some audience, it's going to be relevant, and for some of your followers, it's not going to be relevant. So how do you, because then, if my post is going on Tuesdays, right? And that post is for the people who are 50 plus and planning to run, right? So they have different challenges in their life, and other way around, with different age groups. Women runners, I don't know, I'm just making it up. But they might have different challenges, health wise, and menopause, and I'm just making things more complicated purposely. But I think, how do you cater, and how do you ensure that one of my posts on Tuesday is relevant to that audience, another post on Tuesday is relevant to that audience? Well, nobody does that, right? So how do you solve this problem?
Good question. I think there's a few layers to it. I think the first one is that you need to be careful you don't spread yourself too thinly on your audience, because you can end up sort of being everything to everyone and being quite generic and not really standing out. So I think you can have tiers of audiences, a primary audience and a secondary audience and a tertiary audience. And then you focus on content that is primary, and then you trickle in other content that is secondary and tertiary. So they have some content, but it's not the main focus. And then I think also that this is where paid advertising is really powerful, right? Because that has this power to really identify the individual on a much closer level than what humans are even capable of understanding about the consumer. And then that's showing different content to them at different times, which might be more relatable. So even if it's the model that we have on the website is, more identifiable, is it a young guy? Is it an older woman? Or is it, different scenarios, countryside versus in the street or in the city? Those are really interesting angles. But I think you do need to be careful that you aren't everyone to everyone. It is important to have that primary audience. And I think you will find that there's a natural halo effect that happens. Like, for example, an interesting trend that we see is that we often use like young guys that have tattoos. Are very cool. I would say like they're very like culturally immersed in city running. But what happens more often than not is that actually creates customers who are not that type, but maybe kind of wish they were.
Wow.
So we get lots of older men that maybe see that as like, that could have been a different path they went down in their previous life. They didn't. They ended up working in finance and wearing a suit or something like that.
Yeah.
But they find that appealing because it's sort of their way of like staying in touch and feeling relevant and cool. So it's very complicated audience personas and profiling. And I would say like, don't jump to conclusions, keep it simple, focus on ideally a primary audience, and you will see a natural halo effect over time. But it might not, your audience is more often than not who you think they are, if that makes sense.
Wow, that's amazing. I think that's, if I have to take the one thing away, right? That's the sentence. I think it's so important to really understand and be ready for what you just said, because we sometimes we are getting business, but we're not ready where it's coming from, and
Yeah.
we were surprised. Oh, really? I spent 70% of my ad budget for this audience, but you know what? Actually, that is the audience which is giving me 80% of the business. uh, and yes, let's get ready for the surprises, plan for it, and as you rightly said, it's quite an amazing world where you always have to pivot what you do, have your audiences prioritize, but then be ready to reprioritize, as the market responds. Um, Having said that, going into slightly deeper into this, if we're talking about the paid advertisement that is
Yeah.
working well for many of your customers. Um, we find that sometimes, LinkedIn advertisement, people have this perception, right or wrong, you can correct, you're the specialist. LinkedIn advertisement is very expensive. And my audience, which is the entrepreneurs, for example, to provide my technology services and digital marketing services, my audience is on LinkedIn. But then I find that that's expensive. Then a student audience, it's more on Instagram. So yes, I think that's the primary factors. But in your opinion, how do you see that customers should choose paid advertisement? What are the parameters?
It's a good question, and it is quite complicated because individuals don't just use one platform. I think there's a crazy stat. I think the average social platform that an individual has is like 3 or 4. So that spans many, right? They're not exclusively using LinkedIn as their social platform. It has this common perception that it's the B2B platform. It's where people go for work and business, which I think is partially true. And maybe you could say that people are spending the working day on LinkedIn more than their weekend or outside of working hours. But I don't think should be naive enough to think that people's brains switch from work to home as easily as they do from like the 9 to 5 and 5 to 9
Yeah.
work environment. I think people are always thinking about things that are important to them.
Yeah.
We will have thoughts in the shower about work or meetings that we're going to. So that means when we're sat on the sofa scrolling Instagram, it doesn't mean that we're not thinking about things. And if it's
Yeah.
important to them, then I think they will engage. And so I would say it's not binary, it's not one or the other. I think it's a multi-channel approach and testing different formats, different audience groups. Yes, LinkedIn is more expensive as from a CPM basis, but you could also argue that the audience is more valuable. It's a slightly more refined. You can obviously target by job title and industry and lots of factors that sort of like pre-qualify. Whereas I would say potentially Instagram is a little bit broader. There's a big audience on there. There's definitely a very high quality audience on there, but there's also quite a low quality audience on there. So it's paying a low cost for low quality doesn't necessarily help you in the business. So I think it's a multi-channel approach. It's different angles, testing things. For me, LinkedIn works really well to promote personal posts. So personal branding is really powerful on LinkedIn. Business groups and pages are quite hard to get and do a really good job of. I think you're maybe a little bit more defensive to being sold to on LinkedIn because it can feel like that sometimes. But I personally follow LinkedIn to sort of engage with inspiring individuals, friends, colleagues, acquaintances that I'm keen to follow their story. So you almost sell in a slightly more like informative way, I would say, on LinkedIn, and you can update people about stories, things that have happened. And you can promote personal posts through your business page. So there is a way of like, for example, if I posted like organically around like the power of social media or this event that I went to and I learned some really interesting things, I can also get my business page to promote that and boost it for me and target it to a certain audience. So I think I would say that's like my optimum way of using LinkedIn from a customer acquisition. And then obviously it's building relationships at the end of the day. It's not always about quick wins. Like it's about DMing and commenting and building up rapport. Those are where the high quality relationships and high value relationships often lie, not the quick wins sometimes.
Wow, fantastic, fantastic. I think you are really an expert. You breathe, what you're doing, and your insights have been really, really useful. So, I couldn't stop asking questions, and we kind of, overrun our time. But I think to the benefit to the audience, I think this is extremely valuable. So I'll have to quickly jump onto the conclusion and try to see if we can squeeze in some other time for maybe a live session with the audience, which is a kind of webinar sort of format where people get a little bit of interaction and get more insights from the successes that you had with so many brands. I think it's really amazing how much we can help through your knowledge to the people who are out there. We're finding, serious challenges to sustain their business, to grow their business in this competitive world, and I should say, complicated world as well these days. So I think that's the sole intention of these interviews, to motivate people. If their business is not flying, hey guys, it's not end of the world. Keep trying new things. And here we have these heroes such as you, who have done it, who are ready to help you out. And definitely through this interview, will definitely help them in getting some direction for whatever they're doing. So the last piece is, what's your advice to the entrepreneurs?
Yeah, good. God, there's so much advice I could share, but I guess to keep it succinct and on track with what we've discussed today, I think like social media is the most powerful business tool we've ever had access to. You've got like an immediate access to billions of people across the world. But it only really works when it's used to build something real underneath it. So I think like be authentic in the approach without overusing that word, but you all know what I mean. And like visibility without substance is just noise. So don't join the noise. You do need to make some noise to cut through, but don't just post for the sake of posting. Think about it. The entrepreneurs who really win are going to be the ones who use social to tell their story of a business that's already worth hearing about. So I think there's two parts, like tell the story well, and also think about the business and its commercial viability. Are you really solving a problem? And then lastly, you've got AI at the sort of at your fingertips, which is an absolute game changer for this generation. Anyone who adopts it and uses it to their advantage is going to, really succeed. Like we're going through like a very pivotal point in humanity to a degree. So you've got that MBA student that in the form of GPT or Gemini or whatever you use, Claude, use it to ask you questions about your business and how you can succeed. This is a real sort of powerful position that we're in at the moment. So yeah, the ones that I always sort of believe it's not the smartest or strongest that survive, it's the ones most willing to adapt. And if the world is moving so quickly, if you can stay adapting, you'll keep thriving. So yeah, good luck.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time again.
Pleasure.